On a deserted highway, a weary black taxi driver battles the night, his mind heavy with overdue rent. Suddenly he spots a desperate mother and her fever-stricken child, drenched in the rain and ignored by passing cars. Choosing compassion over money, he takes them to the hospital, expecting nothing in return. In gratitude, the mother gives him a lapel pin, unaware it carries the crest of a powerful family, a symbol that will bring both turmoil and the turning point of his life. Before we dive in, what time are you listening? Where are you from? Drop a comment below and tell me. The rain hammered Chicago's streets like bullets that October night. Marcus Thompson gripped the steering wheel of his beat-up Crown Vic taxi, wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour. At 30, he'd been driving these same streets for over 10 years, and tonight felt no different than the thousands that came before it. Except it was. Marcus checked the cracked digital clock on his dashboard, 11:47 p.m. $73. That's all he'd made in 12 hours of driving through this godforsaken weather. Not even enough to cover tomorrow's rent, let alone his mother's medication. The pills that kept her heart beating cost more than most people spent on groceries. He pulled over at a red light, rubbing his tired eyes. In the rearview mirror he caught sight of his own reflection. Dark skin weathered by years of worry, graying temples that seemed to multiply with each unpaid bill, eyes that had seen too much disappointment. The other drivers at the cab company called him old reliable, always showed up, never complained, kept his head down. Just another poor black man trying to make ends meet in a city that barely noticed he existed. The light turned green. Marcus pressed the gas, and that's when he saw her. A young woman, maybe 30, stood under a broken streetlight, clutching a small boy to her chest. She was drenched, her long brown hair plastered to her face, designer clothes now soaked through. But it wasn't her appearance that made Marcus slow down, it was the child. The little boy's head lolled against his mother's shoulder, his small chest heaving with labored breaths. Marcus had seen that look before. His own nephew had looked the same way the night he died of pneumonia, waiting in an emergency room that moved too slowly for a family without insurance. He pulled over. The woman looked up as his headlights illuminated her desperate face. She was clearly not from this neighborhood. Everything about her screamed money, from her designer purse to her expensive shoes. But money couldn't help her now. Not here, not at midnight in the middle of a storm. Marcus rolled down his window. "Ma'am, you need help." She rushed to the car, stumbling in her heels. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "My son, he's burning up with fever. We just got back from London, and our car service never showed up. My phone died, I lost my wallet somewhere between the airport and here, and She looked down at the boy, who couldn't have been more than 5 years old. "He needs a hospital, now." Marcus stared at her through the rain-streaked window. Every instinct told him to drive away. Rich white woman, no money, probably couldn't pay him even if she wanted to. He'd been burned before by people who promised payment later. His rent was already 3 days late. But then the little boy lifted his head, and Marcus saw his eyes, glassy with fever, unfocused, scared. Those eyes looked exactly like his nephew's had that final night. "Get in," Marcus said. The woman's relief was immediate. "Thank you, oh God, thank you." She climbed into the back seat, cradling the boy. "I'm Emily, this is Josh. The children's hospital on I know where it is," Marcus said, already making a U-turn. "Just hold on tight." As they drove through the empty streets, Marcus caught glimpses of Emily in the rearview mirror. She was whispering to Josh, stroking his hair, pressing her lips to his forehead to check his temperature. The love in her eyes was universal, the same desperate love he'd seen in his own mother's face when he'd been sick as a child. "What happened to your wallet?" Marcus asked, partly to distract her, partly because he was genuinely curious. "Someone bumped into me at baggage claim," Emily said, not looking up from Josh. "By the time I realized it was gone, they'd disappeared. And then our driver wasn't at pickup, and customer service said it would be hours before they could send another car, and Josh started getting worse, and She trailed off, her voice catching. "First time in Chicago. No, I grew up here, but I've been living in London for work. Josh's father and I divorced last year, and I thought maybe it was time to come home." She managed a weak smile, not exactly the homecoming I'd imagined. They pulled into the emergency room parking lot at Northwestern Children's Hospital. Marcus jumped out and opened Emily's door, helping her with Josh. The little boy was barely conscious now, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Go," Marcus said, "I'll park the car." But instead of leaving, Marcus found himself in the waiting room 20 minutes later, still in his taxi driver uniform, watching Emily pace back and forth while doctors worked on Josh. She'd given the intake nurse her information, somehow managing to navigate insurance and paperwork, despite having no ID or wallet. "You didn't have to stay," Emily said, sitting down beside him. "Kid reminded me of someone," Marcus said simply. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sounds of medical equipment. Finally a doctor emerged from the back. "Miss Williams." Emily shot to her feet. "How is he?" The doctor smiled. "He's going to be fine. High fever from a viral infection, probably picked up on the plane. We've got him on IV fluids and medication. He should be ready to go home in a few hours." Emily's knees buckled with relief. Marcus caught her arm, steadying her. "Thank you," she whispered to him. "If you hadn't stopped, anyone would have done the same thing." Emily looked at him with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. "No," she said quietly. "They wouldn't have." When Josh was finally discharged at 4 a.m., Marcus was still there. He drove them to Emily's childhood home in Lincoln Park, a massive Victorian house that probably cost more than Marcus would make in 10 lifetimes. As they sat in the driveway, Emily turned to face him. "I don't know how to thank you. You saved Josh's life tonight. Just doing what's right." Emily reached into her purse, a small clutch she'd been carrying when the larger bag was stolen. She pulled out something small and metallic. "This belonged to my grandfather," she said, placing it in Marcus's palm. "It's been in our family for generations." Marcus looked down at the small pin in his hand. It was gold, heavy, with an intricate design of a lion's head surrounding an ornate letter W. "I can't take this," he said. "You earned it," Emily said firmly. "This pin, it's only given to people our family truly respects. People who've shown real character." She met his eyes. "You're a good man, Marcus Thompson. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Marcus pocketed the pin, not fully understanding its significance. To him it was just a keepsake from a grateful mother. He had no idea it was the Williams family crest, a symbol that carried more weight than he could possibly imagine. 3 weeks later, Marcus made the drive he'd been dreading for months. His mother lived 200 miles south in the small town of Millerville, the same place Marcus had grown up, the same place he'd been eager to escape at 18. Now at 42, he was coming back not as a success story, but as the same struggling taxi driver who'd left all those years ago. His mother, Dorothy Thompson, lived in a cramped rental house on the wrong side of town. At 74, she was still sharp as a tack, but her body was failing her. Heart medication, blood pressure pills, insulin for diabetes, the monthly pharmacy bill was more than Marcus's rent. The family gathering was at his cousin Jerome's house, a modest but well-maintained place in what passed for Millerville's better neighborhood. Jerome worked at the local plant and had managed to buy his house 10 years ago. To hear him tell it, he was practically Bill Gates. Marcus pulled up in his taxi. He couldn't afford a personal car, and immediately felt the stares. His cousin Denise emerged from the house first, her expression a mixture of pity and disdain. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," she said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Still driving that old taxi, I see." Marcus helped his mother out of the passenger seat. Dorothy Thompson moved slowly, but her dignity was intact. She'd raised 3 boys as a single mother, working double shifts at the hospital laundry, and she'd never asked for pity from anyone. "Hello, Denise," Marcus said evenly. Inside, the house buzzed with conversation that died the moment Marcus walked in. 20-some relatives and family friends, all of whom had opinions about Marcus's life choices. His cousin Jerome dominated the room, telling stories about his latest promotion and his son's college scholarship. "Marcus," Jerome boomed with false enthusiasm. "There's our big city taxi driver, still picking up drunks and drug dealers." The room chuckled. Marcus had heard variations of this joke for years. "Honest work," Marcus said, settling his mother into a chair. "Honest, sure," said his Uncle Robert, Jerome's father. "But when you gonna get a real job? You're over 40, boy. Most men your age got careers, families, houses, what you got to show for 20 years in Chicago." Marcus felt the familiar burn of shame in his chest, but he kept his expression neutral. "I'm taking care of Mama, that's what matters. Taking care of her." Jerome laughed. "Man, you living in some fantasy world." She's in that little rental house, can barely afford her medicine, and you talking about taking care of her. Jerome, Dorothy said sharply. No, Aunt Dorothy, somebody needs to tell him the truth. Marcus been playing pretend his whole life, pretending he's gonna make something of himself, pretending he's special. But look at him, 42 years old, driving a taxi, can't even afford to get his mama proper housing. The room went quiet. Marcus felt every eye on him, some sympathetic, most judgmental. These were people who'd watched him grow up, who'd had expectations for the smart kid who'd gotten good grades and talked about leaving town. In their eyes, he wasn't a hard-working man supporting his mother, he was a failure who'd never lived up to his potential. Marcus stood to get his mother some water from the kitchen, and that's when it happened. As he leaned over to reach into his jacket pocket for his phone, the Williams family pin fell out, clattering onto Jerome's hardwood floor. The room went silent as Jerome picked it up, turning it over in his hands. His eyes widened as he recognized the symbol. Well, I'll be damned, Jerome said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Look what we got here, folks. He held up the pin so everyone could see it. Y'all recognize this? This here is the Williams family crest, as in Williams Industries, Williams Foundation, Williams, the richest family in Chicago. The room erupted in laughter. Marcus, Jerome continued, grinning like he just won the lottery. You want to explain why you carrying around the Williams family pin, you pretending to be rich now too? Marcus's heart sank. He'd kept the pin in his jacket pocket, close to his heart, as a reminder of that night, a reminder that he'd done something right, something that mattered. Now it was being held up for ridicule. Let me guess, said his cousin Travis, Jerome's older brother. You found this somewhere and decided to play dress up, maybe tell some story about how you saved some rich white lady. The laughter grew louder. Marcus reached for the pin. Give it back. Oh, this is good, Jerome said, holding the pin out of reach. Marcus here thinks he's connected to the Williams family, probably tells people he works for them, or something. I said give it back. Why? So you can keep pretending you're something you're not. Jerome's voice rose. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Marcus. You've been living in a fantasy your whole life. First you were gonna be a lawyer, then a businessman. Now what? You rubbing shoulders with billionaires. Uncle Robert snatched the pin from Jerome's hand, examining it closely. Boy, where did you get this? You steal it? The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Marcus felt his mother tense beside him. I didn't steal anything. Then how'd you get it? Because I know damn well the Williams family didn't just hand this to some taxi driver. Maybe he found it in someone's taxi, suggested Denise. Decided to keep it, make up some story. The speculation grew more cruel by the minute. Marcus stood there, watching people he'd known his entire life dissect his character, question his integrity, and mock his life choices. All while his elderly mother sat helpless in her chair, forced to listen to her son being humiliated. You know what this is, Jerome announced to the room. This is pathetic. Marcus so desperate to be somebody, to feel important, that he's walking around with stolen jewelry pretending he's friends with rich people. It's not stolen, Marcus said quietly. Then prove it, Travis said. Call up your billionaire friends, have them come down here and vouch for you. More laughter. Marcus felt like he was drowning in their mockery. I can't believe you'd embarrass Aunt Dorothy like this, Jerome continued. Bad enough you can't provide for her properly. Now you got her thinking you're something special with your fake jewelry and made-up stories. That's enough, Dorothy said, trying to stand. No, Aunt Dorothy, it's not enough. Somebody needs to tell Marcus the truth about himself. He ain't special, he ain't important, he's just a broke taxi driver with delusions of grandeur. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. These were family members, people who'd eaten at the same table, shared the same struggles. But in their minds, Marcus's perceived pretension was worse than actual failure. You need to stop lying to yourself, Jerome said, pocketing the pin. And you need to stop lying to your mama. She deserves better than having a son who lives in fantasy land. The landlord chose that moment to knock on the door. Jerome answered it, and Marcus heard the conversation through the thin walls. I'm looking for Mrs. Dorothy Thompson. Her rent's 3 weeks late. Jerome's voice carried back into the living room. Yeah, that's because her son's too busy pretending to be rich to pay her bills. The humiliation was complete. Marcus helped his mother to her feet, gathering their coats while the room buzzed with renewed gossip about his financial situation. Where y'all gonna go? Jerome asked with fake concern. Because I can't have y'all staying here, not with Marcus telling lies and stealing jewelry. As they reached the door, Uncle Robert delivered the final blow. Marcus, you 42 years old, when you gonna grow up and face reality? You ain't never gonna be nothing more than what you are right now, a broke taxi driver who can't even take care of his own mama. The door slammed behind them. Marcus helped his mother into the taxi, his hands shaking with rage and humiliation. As they sat in the driveway, Dorothy reached over and took his hand. They're wrong about you, she said quietly. Are they? I raised you to be a good man. That matters more than money or status or what people think. Marcus wanted to believe her, but sitting there in his beat-up taxi, homeless and broke, listening to his family's laughter through the windows, it was hard to feel like anything more than exactly what they said he was. He started the engine and pulled away. No idea where they would spend the night, no idea how he'd explain any of this to his mother. The Williams family pin was gone, and with it the only proof he had that he'd ever done anything meaningful with his life. Marcus and his mother spent that first night in the taxi parked at a 24-hour diner where the manager let Dorothy use the restroom and bought her coffee. By morning, Marcus had managed to scrape together enough money for a cheap motel room, but he knew it was temporary. He'd have to get back to Chicago, back to work, but the humiliation of the previous night played on repeat in his mind. They were at the motel Tuesday morning when Marcus heard the sound that would change everything: expensive car engines, multiple vehicles moving slowly through the gravel parking lot. Through the thin motel curtains, Marcus saw them, 3 black luxury cars, pristine and gleaming despite the dusty rural road. They looked as out of place in Millerville as spaceships. The first car stopped directly in front of their motel room door. Marcus's heart began to race. He recognized the woman who stepped out of the lead vehicle, Emily Williams, but not as he'd seen her that rain-soaked night 3 weeks ago. This Emily wore a tailored business suit that probably cost more than his monthly income, her hair perfectly styled, her bearing confident and commanding. Behind her emerged an older man, tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that screamed money and power. Even from a distance, Marcus could tell this man was used to rooms falling silent when he entered them. The third figure made Marcus's breath catch. Little Josh, healthy and smiling, wearing expensive clothes but still carrying the same stuffed animal he'd clutched that night in the emergency room. Emily walked directly to the motel room door and knocked. "Mr. Thompson, it's Emily Williams." Marcus opened the door, acutely aware of how he must look after spending a night in his taxi and morning in a cheap motel. Emily's expression was unreadable, professional but not unkind. "Hello, Marcus. This is my grandfather, William Matthews Williams. We need to talk." The older man stepped forward, extending his hand. "Mr. Thompson, I'm told I owe you a significant debt." Marcus shook his hand, confused. "I don't understand. We heard about what happened at your family gathering," Emily said. "About the pin." Marcus's face burned with shame. "How did you? We have ways of knowing when family property surfaces," Williams said. "Imagine our surprise when we learned someone was claiming one of our pins was fake." The realization hit Marcus like cold water. These people had investigated him. They knew about his humiliation, his family's accusations, his current situation. "Mr. Williams, I can explain. No explanation necessary," the older man said. "We know exactly how you came by that pin, Mr. Thompson. The question is, would you like to set the record straight?" 20 minutes later, the 3 luxury cars pulled up to Jerome's house, where another family gathering was in progress. Word had spread quickly through Millerville about Marcus and Dorothy being kicked out, and the extended family had assembled to discuss the situation, and no doubt to further dissect Marcus's character. Jerome was holding court on his front porch, entertaining neighbors with embellished stories about Marcus's delusions when the cars arrived. The neighborhood went dead silent. Emily Williams stepped out first, every inch the powerful executive. William followed, his presence immediately commanding attention. Finally Josh, who looked around curiously at the modest houses. The family gathering emptied onto Jerome's front yard, drawn by a curiosity they couldn't contain. Marcus had never seen his relatives look so confused and nervous. William Matthews Williams was known throughout Illinois. His face had been on magazine covers, his name on buildings. Even in rural Millerville, people recognized him. He was worth more money than the entire town would see in a generation. "Excuse me," William called out, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "I'm looking for the Thompson family gathering. I believe there's been some confusion about my family's property." Jerome stepped forward, trying to project confidence but clearly shaken. Yes sir, Mr. Williams. I'm Jerome Thompson. We found some jewelry that might belong to your family. Found, Williams' voice carried an edge of steel. That's interesting, because according to our records, that pin was given to a Mr. Marcus Thompson as a token of our family's gratitude. The yard fell silent, except for the sound of Jerome swallowing hard. Emily stepped forward. 3 weeks ago Marcus Thompson saved my son's life. He found us stranded in a rainstorm, drove us to the hospital, and stayed with us through the night. He refused payment and asked for nothing in return except the satisfaction of helping a child in need. She looked directly at Jerome. The pin he carries is a symbol of the highest respect our family can bestow. It's given only to individuals who've demonstrated exceptional character and integrity. Uncle Robert, who had been so quick to accuse Marcus of theft, now looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. There seems to have been some suggestion, William continued, his voice growing colder, that Mr. Thompson somehow acquired this pin dishonestly. That he's a liar and a thief. No one dared to speak. Let me be clear, William said, his voice carrying across the silent yard. Marcus Thompson is under the protection of the Williams family. He has proven himself to be a man of extraordinary character. Anyone who suggests otherwise is calling my family's judgment into question. The threat was unmistakable. In a small town where the biggest employer was a factory that could be closed with a phone call, where local banks had relationships with larger financial institutions, where politicians needed campaign contributions, the Williams name carried weight that could crush them all. Jerome pulled the pin from his pocket with shaking hands. Mr. Williams, sir, there was a misunderstanding. We didn't realize, Marcus never said, because he's humble, Emily said sharply. Because he doesn't boast about his good deeds or demand recognition for his kindness. Qualities that seem to be in short supply here. Josh, who had been standing quietly beside his mother, suddenly broke free and ran to Marcus. Uncle Marcus, the little boy wrapped his arms around Marcus's legs, grinning up at him. Mommy told me you saved my life. Are you gonna come live with us now? The simple innocent question from a 5-year-old carried more weight than all of William's implied threats. This child, the most precious thing in Emily's world, loved and trusted Marcus completely. Mr. Thompson, Williams said, his voice softening as he watched the interaction, my family would be honored if you would consider a position with our company. We need people of integrity, people we can trust completely. The pay would be substantial. Enough to ensure your mother receives the best medical care available. The offer hung in the air. Marcus looked around at his relatives, saw the shock and envy in their faces, the sudden realization of what they'd thrown away with their cruelty and small-mindedness. But instead of gloating, instead of throwing their words back at them, Marcus did something that surprised everyone, including himself. Mr. Williams, I appreciate the offer more than you know, but if I take this job to prove something to these people, then I'm just as small as they are. He looked at Jerome, at Uncle Robert, at all the family members who'd spent the previous night mocking his dreams and questioning his character. I don't need anyone to bow down to me, because they're scared of your money, Marcus said quietly. I don't need anyone to respect me because of who I work for. If they can't see my worth as a human being, then their opinions don't matter to me. The yard was dead silent. William Matthews Williams stared at Marcus for a long moment, and then something remarkable happened. He smiled. That, Williams said, is exactly why we need you in our family. 6 months later, Marcus Thompson stood in the marble foyer of the Williams family estate, adjusting his tie before another day of work. But he wasn't adjusting it nervously, he was adjusting it with the quiet confidence of a man who had found his place in the world. He hadn't taken the executive position William had offered that day in Millerville. Instead, he'd accepted something much more valuable, the chance to be exactly who he was, but in a place where that was enough. Marcus had started as Emily's personal driver, but within weeks it became clear that his role was evolving into something much more significant. He wasn't just driving cars, he was managing schedules, handling delicate situations, and becoming the person the Williams family turned to when they needed someone they could trust completely. Good morning, Marcus, Emily said, descending the grand staircase with Josh in tow. The little boy immediately ran to Marcus, who lifted him up for their daily hug. Morning, Miss Emily. Josh, you ready for school? Marcus, can you come to my school today? I want to show you my science project. If your mama says it's okay, I'll try to stop by. Emily smiled, watching their interaction. Over the months she'd seen Marcus's impact on Josh, how the boy had gone from nightmares about that scary night to feeling completely secure knowing that Marcus was there to protect them. The house staff, initially skeptical of the former taxi driver's rapid rise in the family hierarchy, had quickly learned to respect Marcus's judgment and authority. He never demanded deference, never pulled rank, but there was something about his calm competence that made people want to do their best work. "Mr. William wants to see you in his study," Emily said. "Something about the Patterson account." Marcus nodded. The Patterson account was a delicate business matter involving a potential merger. Somehow, Marcus had become William's sounding board for these decisions, not because he understood high finance, but because William valued his read on people's character. In the study, William looked up from his papers. "Marcus, what's your take on Patterson?" "Emily thinks we should move forward, but something feels off to me." Marcus settled into the chair across from William's desk, a chair that had become unofficially his over the past months. "I met him twice now. Both times, he was polite to you and Miss Emily, but I watched how he treated the security guards, the cleaning staff. Man who treats powerful people well but looks through poor people like they're invisible, that tells me something about his character." William nodded. "That's what my gut was telling me too. Emily's got the numbers right, but numbers don't tell you everything about a person." "No sir, they don't. Marcus, I want to talk to you about something else. Emily's been considering a move back to London, expanding our European operations." Marcus felt his stomach drop. After everything, after finding a place where he belonged, was he about to lose it all again? But William continued, "She won't go without you and Josh is adamant that you have to come too. So I'm prepared to make you an offer, Vice President of International Operations. You'd essentially be Emily's right hand, helping her set up the London office." The promotion was staggering. Vice President of a multi-billion-dollar company. 6 months ago, Marcus had been sleeping in his taxi, homeless and humiliated. "Sir, I don't know anything about international business, but you know about people. You know about loyalty, integrity, making good decisions under pressure. The business part, we can teach. The character part, that's something you either have or you don't." That afternoon, Marcus drove Josh to school as usual, but his mind was racing with possibilities. Vice President, London, a chance to start completely fresh in a place where no one would judge him by his past. As they pulled up to the elementary school, Josh turned in his seat. "Marcus, are we really moving to London?" "Maybe. How do you feel about that?" Josh considered this seriously. "Will you still be my driver? If you want me to be, and will you still help me with my homework?" "Of course, then I think it would be an adventure." Marcus smiled. Out of the mouths of babes. That evening, Marcus called his mother. Dorothy had moved into a beautiful assisted living facility, the best in the area, all expenses covered by the Williams family. She had her own apartment, round-the-clock medical care, and social activities that kept her busy and happy. "London," Dorothy said when he told her about the offer. "That's a long way from home." "Yeah, it is, but it sounds like an opportunity." "It is, a big one, then you should take it. I'm proud of you, son. Not because of this job or the money, but because you stayed true to yourself. You could have used their power to hurt those people who hurt you, but you didn't. That's the man I raised." 2 weeks later, Marcus found himself back in Millerville for the first time since that awful day. But this time, he wasn't running away, he was saying goodbye. The town looked smaller than he remembered, shabbier somehow. He drove his mother to visit her sister, and as they pulled up to the modest house, he saw Jerome working in his yard. Their eyes met across the street. Jerome straightened up, clearly uncertain how to react. The story of Marcus's transformation had spread through Millerville like wildfire. The taxi driver, who'd become a vice president. The poor relation who'd been taken in by one of America's wealthiest families. Marcus parked and walked over. "Jerome, Marcus," Jerome's voice was cautious. "Heard you're doing real well for yourself. I'm blessed." "About that night," Jerome started, but Marcus held up a hand. "We're family," Marcus said simply. "Family makes mistakes." The two men stood in awkward silence for a moment. Then Jerome spoke quietly. "I was wrong. About everything. I let my own jealousy and disappointment make me cruel. I'm sorry. Marcus nodded. We all got our struggles. I don't hold grudges. They say you're moving to London. Yeah, new job, new adventures. Jerome looked at him with something that might have been respect. You always were meant for bigger things than this town. Maybe, but this town made me who I am. That matters too. As Marcus walked back to his car, Jerome called after him. Marcus, you take care of yourself over there. You too, cousin. You too. Outside their London window, it was starting to rain, the kind of gentle evening shower that would send people hurrying for cover, looking for shelter, hoping someone might stop and help. Marcus listened to the rain and smiled. Some things never changed, and that was exactly as it should be. In Chicago, Dorothy Thompson watched the BBC News from her comfortable apartment, smiling as she saw footage of her son at a ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Williams Foundation's new homeless shelter. The reporter mentioned that the shelter's design had been personally overseen by Marcus Thompson, Vice President of International Operations, who had insisted that it include not just beds and meals but job training and dignity for its residents. That's my boy, Dorothy said to no one in particular, her heart full of pride. And in Millerville, Jerome Thompson sat in his living room, reading an article in Business Weekly about successful international business partnerships. There, on page 47, was a photo of Marcus Thompson at a conference table with some of Europe's most powerful executives, the caption identifying him as one of America's rising business leaders. Jerome cut out the article and put it in his wallet. Not because he wanted to brag about knowing Marcus, but because he wanted to remember the lesson his cousin had taught him. Sometimes the people we think we know the best are the ones we understand the least. Sometimes a taxi driver is just a taxi driver, and sometimes he's so much more.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.